What is up, all my Nexus family? It is your host, Dr. Daniel Kimbley, and you are tuned into another episode of the Nexus Podcast. And on this week's episode of the podcast, what I want to talk about is the idea of thinking versus reality. The idea of thinking versus reality. And this brings up a lot, and I'm going to talk about a couple of things in the context of this podcast. And one of the things that I want to talk about is how our thinking and our reality have to be aligned in order for our bodies to physically feel well. And when I say feel well, I'm not talking about expressing health or what most people would call getting sick, but I'm talking about if we experience pain of any sort in our physical bodies, it often comes from one place and one place specific. I'll share a case study with you of something that happened to me this week inside of our office, and then I'll wrap it up by sharing a little quote from you and something that I think that you could take away to radically transform your life and start to process stress differently. Because ultimately, what you know about Nexus Family Chiropractic, if you have been with us for any amount of time, is that we are 100% committed to seeing you elevate your life in all aspects. So before I get into what went down this week and I share a quote with you from one of my all-time favorite books, I want to lay out a couple of things. And the thing I want to lay out with you is this, is that we know if you've been getting adjusted by us and you've been in our office before, then you know well that the reason that we adjust the joints of your spine is because we're literally trying to wake up the brain, specifically the front part of the brain and the frontal cortex. Now, this matters because the frontal cortex is responsible for a number of things inside of the way that you function as a human being. Your frontal cortex is responsible for deciphering what is true and what is not true. Your frontal cortex is responsible for your relational abilities or your emotional intelligence and the way that you experience relationships with other people. It's responsible for your ability to make good decisions or bad decisions or right decisions or wrong decisions. Your frontal cortex is responsible for your grit. It's responsible for your willpower. It's responsible for your motivation. It's responsible for your curiosity and a number of other things. And so the reason that the adjustment matters, the reason that we put vibrations into the joints of the spine is because we're literally affecting the cerebellum and then the frontal cortex to start to wake it up or start to strengthen it so that literally your thinking starts to change. Yes, we can get people out of pain. But pain comes from a very specific place, and it often has to do with the way someone is thinking. And if you don't address the thinking, we will always miss the idea that someone could be healthy or get better with just working on their shoulder or working on their hip or working on their knee or working on their low back or working on their ankle or whatever the thing is that people are struggling with. Yes, we can get people out of pain, but the reason that we can get people out of pain is because we understand very deeply exactly how the body works. And one of the things that not a lot of people are talking about because it's not well understood is this idea that your body can literally store emotional stress and mental stress inside of us as pain. And that pain can manifest in different ways. It can manifest as bunions. It can manifest as knee pain. It can manifest as shoulder pain. It can manifest as neck pain. And each of the emotions associated with the different pains, there are different emotional states that are involved, or different energetic states, or different thought process states. And so the reason that I share this with you is because 90% of the people that we take care of inside of our practice, here's what I know, is that when they come into us, and let's say they've had a shoulder issue, for instance, 90% of the time, there's actually nothing wrong with their shoulder. What it comes from when they have pain or they're experiencing pain there is an emotional loop or a thought process loop that can't be broken. And the reality is that unless they have chiropractic care, unless they're getting adjusted and getting movement of the joints of the spine to wake up the frontal cortex of the brain, they can't change those thought processes. From there, once we start to wake up the frontal part of the brain, we can actively do things to help us transform our thought processes so that we stop arguing with reality and we get down into this conversation of what's reality versus what our thinking is. And the truth is that our brains are wired to be stressful. Our brains are wired to be negative. So there's lots of training that has to come. But the truth is that unless you're getting adjusted, unless you have chiropractic care to literally wake up your brain and wake up the frontal cortex of your brain, then the likelihood that you're ever going to be able to break those loops on your own is very, very low. The question becomes why? And the answer to that is that we know in the 80s there's a guy named Roger Sperry. He won a Nobel Prize for finding that 90% of nutrition and stimulation to your brain comes from movement of the joints of the spine. So think about this. If you think of your brain like a workout, think of your brain like a muscle. 90% of the workout that your brain gets comes from movement of your joints of your spine. So oftentimes, here's what happens in today's society is we go to the gym for 1 hour a day, and then we sit at a desk for the other 14 hours of the day. We sit down eating, we're sitting constantly, we're driving in our cars 2 hours back and forth from work, and we don't get any movement into the joints of the spine. Therefore, we're not feeding information to the brain. When we're not feeding information to the brain, we're not feeding the frontal cortex of the brain. If we're not feeding the frontal cortex of the brain, then our body's going to be naturally in a more stressed out state, and it's also naturally going to be in a state of fight or flight. It's naturally going to be in a state that has more difficulty determining truth, that has more difficulty connecting with people emotionally, has more difficulty with grit, with willpower, with determination, with curiosity, all the things that are important for a successful human being to have, regardless of who it is and regardless of the age. So why I get so passionate about chiropractic care is because when we put the vibration of the joint into the joints of the spine, we're literally waking up your part of your brain that allows you to think about in more truthful manners, that allows you to better differentiate good versus bad and right versus wrong, that allows you to better set a goal and then keep yourself accountable to stick with it long term. This is why I get so fired up about chiropractic. Now the question is what does this have to do with you? It has to do with you because oftentimes we see people come into our office who are experiencing some kind of pain. And when they're experiencing some kind of pain, they think that something is wrong with them, and they feed themselves a story that is not reality, but they feed themselves a story that, oh my gosh, something must be wrong. I need to go see an orthopedist, I need to go see a surgeon, I need to go see a physical therapist, I need to go see somebody else because there's something physically wrong with my shoulder. Here's the truth. Is that long before there was ever pain in the shoulder, there was neurological dysfunction, meaning that the brain was firing less than on one side or the other. It was firing inappropriately, muscles around the joints, around that joint, and then later pain came. And so long before there was pain, there was an issue at a neurological level. Chiropractors are the only people that know to test for this and check for this. This is why we get such insane results with the people that we take care of inside of our office. Now, am I telling you not to go see an orthopedist? Absolutely not. That's for you to decide. That's for your MD to decide. That is not for me to guide you with. My reality, though, is that the people that we take care of inside of our office, I notice one thing and one thing specifically is that 90% of the time, their pain actually comes from emotional states. Their pain actually comes from mental states, things that they're thinking about, things that they're dealing with inside of their lives. So what does this have to do with you? It has to do with you because in a world where we are chronically stressed out and we have tons of things going on, if you have issues, the likelihood that those issues are because you're broken is very, 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 very low. I actually don't believe that any human being is broken. I believe that we all have a specific set of gifts for healing, and some of those just happen to be pain, so the brain can tell the body to rest. And so if someone, for instance, got shoulder pain, then what would it be if it weren't that there was something wrong with the rotator cuff or something wrong with the labrum or something else? And the reality is that shoulders are strongly associated with joy. And so over the course of this last week, what I saw is I had a patient who was coming into us and she used to have chronic shoulder issues. And I kept sharing this idea with her is that, hey, it's like, what are you doing inside of your life that you're not experiencing joy with? What are you doing inside of your life that, you know, you're not necessarily having fun with, or you feel that feeling of like, oh, I really don't want to do this today. All of those things are actually what caused her physical pain. So when we start adjusting her, when she starts becoming aware of her thought processes, realizing and starts cutting things out of her life that didn't bring her joy in the first place, guess what? Shoulder pain goes away. Why? We wake up front part of the brain. She can start to think differently. When she starts to think differently, she starts to act differently. When she starts to act differently, pain goes away. Super cool conversation. So this same person then comes into our office this week and she sits down with me and she's like, hey, you know what? My ankle's been bugging me for like quite some time. And I just can't figure out why. Like it won't go away. I haven't been running on it. It's still bugging me. I've rested it. I've iced it. I've done all the things. And the place where the pain was is there's like no tissue there. There's not really any bone there. There's not really anything there for her to be experiencing pain in that exact area. And so I walk her through this idea of like, hey, tell me what's going on in your life. Like, is there something that you maybe feel guilty about? And a lot of times ankles can represent guilt. So if somebody has ankle issues, chronic ankle issues, it can represent this idea of like being inflexible or flexibility. It can represent guilt or like repressed guilt. But it can also represent this experience of like not being able to receive pleasure. So when I think about not being able to receive pleasure, I'm talking about like not being able to take a compliment or not being able to celebrate the success that you've had inside of your life. And so for this person that I'm talking about, we had another conversation. It's like, hey, remember how we talked about this with your shoulder? Well, guess what? I think the same thing is true with your ankle. Like we've done all the tests, we've done all the work, we've done all the things, and it just doesn't really seem to be getting better. And yes, we're adjusting joints of the spine. So now we have to start to address what's the thought process like. And so we're catching her pattern. We've adjusted her. We've woken up and strengthened the frontal cortex of the brain, but now we have to literally come in and address her thought process. And when we address her thought processes about reality, her world starts to change. And so I bring this up with you because, like, if you think I'm just making this up or it's coming out of left field somewhere, it's not. The reality is that there's a book called Loving What Is by Byron Katie. And what she talks about in the context of that book is that anytime that we have mental stress, anytime that we have turmoil, it literally comes from us as human beings fighting with reality. And I want to share a quote with you because I think it's important of what Byron Katie actually talks about when she talks about this in her book. And this is something that actually popped up on my Instagram feed just a few days ago, and I couldn't help but share it with you today because I think it's so pertinent and so relevant to people who are experiencing certain kinds of pain, but they can't associate their traumas with it. They can't associate their life stresses with it. And what we're all about is literally like uplifting you to the level where you can start to heal yourself at a deeper level, where you can start to navigate on your own this idea that, like, when your thoughts lead you astray, it can cause physical pain. And unless you can wake up and strengthen the frontal part of your brain, which we do through chiropractic care, very specific brain-based chiropractic care, and you start to catch yourself in these emotional loops, then you will start to get results in your life that are unparalleled. If you just do what I'm about to share with you and nothing else, and you're not getting adjusted, the likelihood that you're going to get results is very low because we have to wake up and strengthen the frontal cortex of the brain via movement of the joints of the spine. Then we add this as a strategy on top of it, and this is like dynamite. It's like rocket fuel. It's literally a game changer. It's changed my lives. I've seen it change hundreds of people's lives inside of my practice. And this is what she says. She says, nothing terrible has ever happened to us except for in our thinking. Reality is always good, even in situations that might seem like nightmares. The story we tell ourselves is the only nightmare that we have lived. I'm going to repeat that one more time because I think it's crucial. The story that we tell ourselves is the only nightmare that we have ever lived. When I say that the worst that can happen is a belief, I am being literal. The worst that can happen to you is your uninvestigated belief system. My friends, this is why it is so crucial that every person, in my opinion, have chiropractic care on the face of the planet. Because people who experience physical pain and physical symptoms and trials and tribulations and they can't seem to get healthy, it comes from a weakened frontal cortex. Our frontal cortex is what allows us to develop a belief system about the world in which we live. And if we have a weak frontal cortex, we are going to have a weak belief system. And if we have a strong frontal cortex, we are going to have a strong belief system. When we strengthen the front part of the brain in chiropractic, and then we understand and we start to think about our bodies and our physical world differently, things will literally change. I love what she said. Nothing terrible has ever happened except for in our own thinking. In our own thinking. Everything in our lives are a gift. Everything in our lives are a gift. Your pain that you may be experiencing with that nobody else can give you an answer for, I have an answer for you. It's because of your thinking. And when you can strengthen your brain, you must wake up the brain first, and then you start to change the way you think. You will see things in your body completely disappear. Things that nobody else could give you an answer for. Why? Because the pain, the thing that you're dealing with, the symptom, it is a result of your brain literally telling you to stop and make a change. And unless you make a change here with the way we think about the world, with the belief systems that we have, we will forever be a victim to ourselves. My friends, that's all I have for you on this episode. I'm going to ask you a simple question though before we go. Is like, where in your life do you have uninvestigated belief systems? Like, what things do you believe to be true about the world that you haven't investigated, you've just taken for granted? I know a lot of people who come into our office, one of the things that they don't investigate, don't think about, is this idea that, like, your body is the best doctor. I always tell them, first off, I'm not the best doctor. I can't heal you. God gave you the gift of healing. You can only heal yourself. And this is true. It's a belief system, but it's not a belief system. It's an absolute truth. And people who disagree with that, they have a weakened frontal cortex of the brain. The body only knows how to heal itself. And so, my friends, where do you have uninvestigated belief systems? And what can you do today? Where can you start to look at the beliefs that you have about things and ask yourself, is that true? Like, is this person really a bad person? And if there's even a sliver that the answer, do you know 100% for sure it's true? And if your answer is no to that 100% question, then there's opportunity, there's a window for a new reality that you can set yourself up with. And it all starts, in my humble opinion, with brain-based chiropractic care to wake up the front part of your brain and then start to explore these belief systems that you have on your own. My friends, I will come at you live again next week. If you got some value out of this, do me one of two things. One, leave a rating. Two, leave a review. I'm also going to ask for one more thing, is that if you're watching this video, if you would just subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're trying to break into YouTube and do things a little bit differently so we can review video, so you can see this in different ways if that's your style as well. So I love you, appreciate you, hope you guys have an amazing week, and we'll come at you again next week. Peace.